It's been quite a long time since there was a MacBook that's been released that's genuinely piqued my interest. Sure, the MacBook Pro M1 was pretty cool when it was released in November 2020, and the equivalent performance Mac Mini M1 we bought for review was indeed a beast. It handled any audio project without even breaking a sweat. And even now, 18 months later, I'm still not even entirely sure I've heard the fans spin up. Does it even have fans? It's pretty amazing. However, those who know me well know that you can never have too much power, especially for those doing a multitude of tasks, such as editing these YouTube videos into the fray, and I'm constantly maxing out my PC. So we need more, much more. I bought an oddly named 16-inch MacBook Pro M1 Pro, which sounds like they're really trying to emphasize the Pro now. As a disclaimer, of course, we aren't sponsored by Apple. I mean, we only need another 14.6 million subscribers or so to catch up to Linus Tech Tips, so really we're not that far off. The 16-inch M1 Pro costs £2,400, and this is a base model computer with a 10-core CPU and 16-core GPU, 512 gigs of storage, and 16 gigs of RAM. But before you jump to any conclusions about such a small amount of RAM, as we found out with the Mac Mini M1, 16 gigs of M1 RAM goes a long way, indeed much further than it does with standard RAM. I bought this laptop as I needed something with enough power to handle the 6K resolution video files from our camera whilst on set at video shoots, as well as something to process any audio I might throw at it without breaking a sweat. I've got really high hopes for this laptop, but firstly, let's take a look at the form factor. Apple have returned back to the blocky, industrial style of their older models. As you can see, compared to my ancient 2014 MacBook Pro, it's more squared off, and I really like it. Please excuse the state of my old Mac, it's lived a pretty hard life. It's been rained on at festivals, dropped, stood on, melted in direct sunlight at 45-degree air temperatures, and even features an impressive battery life of up to 6 minutes. It's in pretty bad shape, so I'm glad to be leaving it behind. It still works, but only just. Another reason I'm comparing this specific 2014 MacBook Pro to the new model is that other than the 2015 model, which was very similar, it's one of the last Macs to have all of the useful ports: USB, Thunderbolt, HDMI, and an SD card slot. I'm still not sure why Apple thought it would be a good idea for a Pro laptop to have all of those missing for the last 5 or 6 years, but to once again be able to plug in an external display using a regular HDMI cable, but without having to resort to buying another chain of adapters and connectors, is a very welcome comeback feature indeed. After all, it's for pros. MacBook Pro. Pros plug things in. Secondly, the screen is much larger. The 16-inch laptop is a revival to the Apple MacBook model lineup, meaning those who need tons of screen space can once again just about get by with one screen. The screen runs at a resolution of 3456 by 2234 pixels, which is near enough 4K, give or take, and offers a monstrous refresh rate of 120 Hz, which means this screen looks absolutely lush when displaying 120 frames per second of premium flopcat footage. Obviously, I can't portray that to you over YouTube because we film our videos at 25 frames per second, but believe me, it's really smooth. Frustratingly, content recorded at 120 FPS for general media consumption doesn't really exist yet. It's only used in slow motion footage, and even gameplay footage which could theoretically reach those refresh rates is quite often rendered down to 30 or 60 frames per second for YouTube distribution anyway. The only way I managed to actually test the 120Hz display was to download some 8K 120 FPS footage from red.com, who make top-end cinema cameras, and load it into my editing software, DaVinci Resolve. It looks damn cool, but again, not really that practical. Nevertheless, it's a cool feature to have. The image quality is ridiculously clear, and the XDR display gives amazing color accuracy for those interested in photography or videography. The battery life is quite simply astonishing. On Apple's website, they claim an insane 21 hours battery life on the M1 Pro 16-inch laptop, and I truly believe their claims aren't too far removed from the real-life performance. When just browsing the web, I do indeed get an entire day's battery on just one charge, and even when editing 6K video footage on Resolve, I get an outrageous 8 hours of editing time, again on a single charge, which far exceeded my expectations. If you're working on audio production projects on Logic, you're surely in safe hands for long sessions if charging isn't possible. Perhaps a few of our Discord members who frequent coffee shops for mixing could do with a battery life just like this. Finally, before we move on to the production performance of this laptop, let's quickly talk about the speakers. Now, laptop speakers never have been and probably never will be as good as a dedicated speaker system you'd get in a studio. They're tiny. The 16-inch laptop speakers are lacking in bass from around 100 Hz down, but what they lack in bass, they gain in immersion. As you may know, Apple has been really pushing their own iteration of Dolby Atmos, namely spatial audio, quite a lot recently, with all new Macs able to play back this content. Of course, unless you've got a dedicated 9.1.4 speaker system to play it back, you're never going to be getting the full experience, even though the headphone algorithm is improving all the time. And as we saw in our recent video on the subject, it even fooled Mark into thinking the speakers were still on.
Oh shit.
The laptop's 6 speakers throw sound out much wider than you'd imagine to be possible, and the audio does indeed sound incredibly immersive, just like there are speakers off to the side of your head. It's all achieved through psychoacoustic technology, and so there is a very small area in which this actually works. If you're not sitting directly in front of the Mac, it'll just sound a bit odd and maybe a bit phasey. Even so, again, it's a cool feature and a nice to have for consuming general content during daily use. Let's move on to the performance. Is this MacBook really the ultimate production machine? Well, unless you're able to afford a Mac Pro, then I'd say yes. It's got the power of a top-end PC, but the portability of a laptop, along with a battery life which you won't find in any other portable computer. When using it in real-life testing, I just cannot make it slow down, no matter how hard I throw huge projects at it. It absolutely blasted through my 6K video project without the fans even spinning up, which is seriously impressive. The combination of M1 hardware with M1 compatible software means performance goes through the roof. Again, performance on Logic is second to none, with no signs of slowing down even on the biggest of projects. The only way I could get the laptop to actually struggle was by running a 3D rendering project on it. I do a lot of 3D design, and my RTX 3080 graphics cards can breeze through any project I'm working on, but even though the MacBook has a massive 10 GB of video RAM on board, it doesn't have quite the same performance as a discrete, dedicated graphics card. Despite this, the performance is still very good, and it will still outperform most mid-range 3D rendering computers. One hardware benefit of using the M1 processors is that they have built-in ProRes encoders. So if you're a video editor and you're looking for a machine to run super large projects, then this could be the one for you. Apple claims that the M1 Pro can run up to 20 4K ProRes video streams at once, and I must admit, despite it being perfectly happy running 6K Blackmagic RAW files, it did struggle a bit running 20 streams of the same format Apple claimed to have used in their testing. But when running a more realistic project that doesn't consist of 20 lanes of parallel video, that combination of hardware and software in perfect harmony is absolutely unstoppable. All the software I've tested is natively running on M1 code. I haven't had to use Rosetta yet on this laptop, however I do know that if you run Intel-based software through Rosetta, you'll see a slight performance dip. So if you're looking to get the most from your new MacBook, then definitely try to use software specifically designed for the hardware. Even 18 months after M1's initial release back in November 2020, we're still seeing software that isn't natively compatible. It's only in the last few months that my favourite plugin bundle, the Slate All Access Pass, has finally moved to M1. It's been quite a slow uptake for many companies, but luckily some of the most common software is already out there with M1 compatibility. So would I recommend buying one of these MacBooks? Absolutely yes. This laptop has been the answer to many portability and power issues I've been facing over the last few years. Being able to flawlessly review 6K video footage and process audio whilst out and about is a lifesaver for me, and I'm sure it will serve me well for many years to come. And if it lasts as long as my previous Mac did, then that works out at around 25 quid per month. I highly recommend doing some research on your particular software needs to find out about their performance on M1 Pro hardware, but I honestly feel like I've been missing out by not buying a new Mac up until now. The integration of software companies like Blackmagic working so closely with Apple to create powerful products that enable you to be creative and not held back by the hardware, it's just amazing. I find myself to be quite impatient when it comes to waiting for computers to process things. The downside of having such a short attention span and growing up around modern technology is that I want everything to happen now. And I feel that with the Mac, I have it. The computer isn't the bottleneck anymore. If you want bucket loads of power with really great software and hardware integration, this is the computer to go for. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Let me know down in the comments if you've got a new Mac M1 Pro, Max or Ultra system in your studio and how you're finding it. I'd love to hear from you. Remember, create, don't hate, like, subscribe and ding the ding dong, and you'll see us in the next one. Oh, I missed. It's a fish.